more panels, followed by the networking event for You Can Play, as well as the workshop. So this panel is Building Your Brand Through Licensing and Merchandising. Dr. Cheri Bradish, will host this panel. She's the director of the Future of Sport Lab and chair of marketing management at Ryerson University. She actually also spent 16 years at Brock University. She was the first hire and the founder of their successful Bachelor of Sport Management degree. Her area of interest is with regards to sport business strategy and trends, including innovation and entrepreneurship, sport and social impact, and women in sport leadership. Leah MacNab is the managing director of NBA Canada, and she's worked for the NBA for over a decade. She's responsible for the development and growth of the league's business in Canada, so that includes television and digital media, marketing and retail partnerships. Previously, she was the NBA Canada's senior director of global marketing partnerships, leading the marketing activation team for the NBA in Canada. Mike Ouellet is the Senior Business and Association Counsel for the NHLPA, so he oversees all business and marketing activities of the association. His experience and expertise started in 1996 when he actually helped organize the World Cup of Hockey. He also served as the co-tournament director and board member of the 2004 World Cup of Hockey, and he's responsible for the NHLPA's joint international hockey activities with the NHL. So that includes the NHL Premier Games in Europe, which launched the regular season schedule. And Daryl Seidman, he was most previously with the National Football League. He'd worked there since 2012, and his responsibilities were the day-to-day management of the NFL's Consumer Products Department in Canada, so overseeing the current licensee management, new consumer products, business development, product approvals, retail development, and building strategic initiatives to help grow the NFL in Canada. So it's building your brand through licensing and merchandising.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. Good to see all three of you. We've done some good prep work, and as always, thanks to Trevor and Brian for including us in the sessions. So I know that we've gotten a great introduction and a little bit about your background, but we're going to go into a primer in terms of how each of the individuals here really defines and thinks about licensing and merchandising. But right before that, I was just hoping each of you can give us a bit of a deeper dive on specifically your lens and involvement day-to-day or over the course of your career in licensing and merchandising. So Leah, and congratulations in your new role. And as a woman who is supporting more women in the industry, I'm very excited to see you at the NBA. So let's start with you.
Thank you. So I started at the NBA about 15 years ago, and I worked 50% of my time in sponsorship, 50% of my time in licensing. And so licensing is really close to my heart because that's part of where I got my start. It's also one of the few parts of the sports industry where you can't really take a program and graduate with learning. It's one of those things you learn on the job or you learn from someone in the business that has done it before. And the thing I love the most about it is the opportunity to work with both huge companies like our master licensee Nike or Spalding, and really small entrepreneurs for very niche products. So you kind of get to run the gamut, and I loved being there from like the moment of conception on a piece of paper to the actual physical product at retail. That whole life cycle was really exciting.
Perfect. And we'll circle back because there are some great case studies over the last year in the NBA and in Toronto that I know will bring to life towards the end of the panel. Mike?
As I heard, I started the NHLPA in 1996 at 12 years old. Sorry, it's a long time ago. I'm a lawyer. Any other lawyers in the room? I'm sure there are a few. Yes, Trevor, I know. Yeah, okay. So I'm not a great group of lawyers in the room, but I started back in 96 working on trading cards and video games. It still continues to this day, trading cards, video games, apparel. We're getting into some new digital products right now, but really the staple of the licensing world for the players' associations, and I think for a large part the leagues, hasn't changed very much over the last little while. And since 1996, I've been digging into this stuff, and from a legal perspective, I'll give a little primer after the quick introductions here, but I'm glad there are at least a few lawyers in the room. I'll share some of the things that I've picked up over the years. Maybe you can keep front and center in your minds as you're working through this stuff.
Great. Daryl?
Great. Well, I've spent the majority of my career in sports licensing. As Leah sort of alluded to, there's no real manual out there to kind of learn and understand this business. I was lucky enough as a young kid at 15 years old is when I like to say my career started. And I was working in a sports retail shop. And that's when I really kind of got my feet wet into selling merchandise and getting yourself acquainted with the companies that produce product, how to buy it, how to sell it, more importantly. So what I did was, I took sort of that experience at a very young age and tried to continue that throughout my career. And what it has done was provided me a good foundation to continue my career. I started as an intern at the NHL. And what I will say to a lot of the students in the room is, the internship afforded me that foot in the door, and I would highly recommend anybody who has an opportunity to do an internship. Doesn't matter where it is. I highly recommend you doing that, and it's kind of helped get me to where I am today. So I spent a couple of years at IMG managing the license portfolio for the CFL at the time, CHL, ESPN, the X Games, and PGA Tour. So that also got me some exposure to some other brands. And then I proceeded my career to the NFL for the past 8 years. So I really enjoy the business. I really enjoy, the people you meet in this business. And, I'm looking forward to it.
Great. So as Mike indicated, when we were prepping for this, we thought a little bit about the audience and a bit about the topic. And we felt perhaps for those of you in school or in transition, or regardless of where you are at your level in the industry, it might be helpful to build a bit of a primer in terms of giving different perspective from the different lens of the panelists and experts here today. So I'm going to start with Mike, if that's all right, and really just maybe dive into some of those legal, commercial perspectives, because it really isn't, as Les pointed out, something that we too often talk about in the traditional sport business curriculum, but it is such an integral piece of the business. So I'll leave it to you to give your lens.
You think of licensing and you think of the bobbleheads and trading cards that sit on the store counters, but really before those things make it to the stores, there's a negotiation, a relationship that has to be built between the brand owner and the party that wants to make the product or use the brand itself on a product. So a license really is a relationship between two parties. It's an agreement between two parties where one grants the right to the other permission to use either an image of a player or an image of a celebrity or a copyrighted brand on a product. From the licensee's perspective, the license agreement has to give him the permission to use it, and it's essentially the licensor agreeing not to sue the person for using his intellectual property without permission. So take away from the licensees out there, make sure you've got your license agreement done so that nobody can come after you and say that you're using somebody else's intellectual property without permission. So often these deals happen and people aren't very buttoned down with the agreements or the piece of paper, and you start doing things without the necessary permissions, you can find yourself in trouble. From the licensor's perspective, the one granting the rights, it's also very important to have a document or a piece of paper done up and signed, executed, because as a licensor, you want to make sure that you're retaining control over how your IP is being used. If you let people use your intellectual property without certain controls and approval rights over how things are being used, you could over time lose the right to prevent people from using it, which is disastrous. So the license itself is a permission granted to third parties to use your brand, your intellectual property, for certain permitted uses. As long as those things are followed, everything works out well. The license itself will have a number of different provisions in it that are key. The term, obviously you want to make sure you've got a set term with renewal opportunities there. The territory, you want to define the territory in which the licensee can use your intellectual property. You often want to define the product. You know, there could be a whole slew of products they could use the product for, the IP for, but defining the product that the IP is going to be used on or in connection with is extremely important. Approvals, very important as well, making sure that you as the licensor retain control over how your intellectual property is being used. Right? So those are just certain of the key terms in a license agreement. Now, from our perspective, I think up here where we're licensing, you know, team marks and league marks and players' names and images to the public or to third parties to manufacture products for the public. You know, you've got a trademark and copyright on one side, and you've got personality rights on the other side. Personality rights being names, image, and likenesses of individuals. That's what we do as a players' associations. The leagues and the teams will license the trademarks or the copyright in the image. Trademark licensing and copyright licensing seem to be, I guess, confusing at times which one is which, but they're often lumped together. But trademark licensing is really the licensing of a brand that you can use to identify the source of the goods. So that's like Broyhill. It's a furniture manufacturer. You want to go into a store and look for the trademark on that piece of furniture. And if it's Broyhill, it tells you that that's a good supplier of goods. They're not using the Broyhill mark on a product like they are a Nike or a Toronto Maple Leafs t-shirt or an NBA t-shirt or NFL t-shirt. The latter group of licensing in, I guess, my view, is a copyright license. That you're licensing the design itself on the product. You're not licensing that mark to identify the source of the goods, right? So you've got those types of licenses, and then the name, image, and likeness license, which we'll see a lot more coming up down the, you know, shortly as this whole NCAA thing unfolds. We can talk about that later if we've got some time, about the players who play for college sports wanting to take advantage of, you know, commercializing their names and images. I know that's a topic dear to Brian's heart, but we'll talk about that later on. So those are the types of licenses that we're talking about in the sports license world that we're talking about here today.
Right, good, thank you for that. We'll come back to some of those pieces as well. Leah? If perhaps, speaking, and we talked about some of the branding, merchandising components of what is this licensing and merchandising space in this vertical of the sport business industry, if you want to maybe just speak to a little bit more in detail.
So at the NBA, we've sort of expanded our definition of what would be traditional consumer products, things like jerseys, hats, video games, basketballs, et cetera, to include physical spaces, so branded attractions, which we are opening around the world. We have one with Disney, which is open today. If you're interested in going to Orlando, check it out. It's called the NBA Disney Experience. And it's only been open since July, so net new to us, which is really cool. And then also into a lot more mobile gaming and digital experiences that we're licensing around the world, just as kind of different, you know, cultures consume our sport in a different way. And so especially when we think about Asia, Korea, places like that, we've got a very different mix of products.
Perfect, good. And Daryl, over to you maybe just to talk about weaving those pieces together and from your lens, kind of a bit more of a bigger picture on the whole business of licensing and merchandising?
Yeah, like Leah had mentioned, you know, we talk about licensing as selling jerseys and hats, you know, to fans here in North America, but what I don't think a lot of people maybe consider is the extension of your brand and what licensing really is, not just locally, but globally. And that's one thing that's one aspect that I think leagues and teams and players you know, need to continue to focus on, is using that as a driver, as a vehicle to grow your brand globally. It's not just about, you know, how do you set up, you know, more fans in this particular area, but when you're in, you know, if you're an NHL player and you're in Sweden and you see a player name and number T, you know, on the street, well, that's effectively extending your brand. And I think, you know, we all have global businesses, but I think, you know, licensing in general is a real effective way to grow your brand, not only locally, but globally. And I think, you know, the other thing that licensing, you know, really does within an organization is it touches, one of the very few departments that touches every aspect of your business. It touches corporate partnerships through premiums and in-stadium giveaways. It touches, obviously, the retail and merchandise and hats and tees. But it also touches on field or on ice and your partnerships with a Nike or Adidas or whoever that may be. And obviously, you've got the legal aspect of it, which is always fun to deal with. But it really is a department that touches a lot of aspects within an organization. So we've been lucky enough to be able to help foster that.
Perfect. I think we'll flip to the question around kind of what the trends and the challenges, and we'll go into the meatiness of it, because I think the primer really well introduced the topic, if that's okay with you three. So we can come back to that if time permitting. So one of the things I think that's really interesting and brings this alive for those in the audience is really to talk about some of those trends that we talked about on our prep call in terms of, what is the excitement, what are the hot button topics within this area, and then flip side, what's going to keep people up at night in this area of business. So my kids always talk about the guy that's selling the t-shirts out of the van, and what does that mean to this business? So there you go. That's at a very layman's perspective.
That keeps us up at night, for sure.
So perhaps let's just talk about some of those topics, and I'll start with you, Leah, really to talk about, and I know on the phone we talked about everything from how the business is becoming integrated and how it's specific to Canada, and then as you spoke to Mike, even looking at some of the things we use as a case study with the NCAA and some of those other properties, and then the news today, as Daryl and I were talking about earlier, about how some of these players' associations are merging and coming together. So I know that's really opening it up, but I think it's healthy just to have a really good conversation like we did on the phone. So I'll start with you.
So I'll start. The thing that I'm most excited about are the branded pop-up experiences that we're seeing everywhere. So this looks like a relatively young crowd, but if anyone has kids, there's a Dr. Seuss experience at Square One right now, which is really cool. We've done a couple at the NBA. So in April, we did what we called NBA Winners Corner, which was 10,000 square feet. We presented by OLG, so we did work with a corporate sponsor, but it was to bring to life the history of basketball and championships in the NBA over time to a market where we thought there was a strong likelihood that the Raptors could make it to the NBA Finals. Turned out that we were right, which was amazing. But it was a chance for us to engage fans off the court, to really grab those curious and casual fans and bring them into our game, have them build a deeper connection to our brand, and also experience the brand in a different way. So that type of kind of merging the real world experience with what you might experience in a digital world is something that I think will only grow, because for most of our properties, there's a limited amount of assets, so seats in the buildings in which our sports play. And then there's a massive amount of fans that live outside of those cities, and they are looking for ways to engage with the brand. And the only way we're going to further monetize them is if we can engage them on a more frequent basis in both real world and digital. So I think that's something that I'm most excited about. Perfect. It merges a lot of sports and departments within kind of our traditional hierarchy, but that's also part of what makes it exciting.
And part of what Daryl was talking about in terms of kind of touching all units.
Yeah.
The example you give, is that the OLG or is that a different, yeah?
NBA Winners Corner presented by OLG. We did that one in April. We might do it again. We also did NBA Crossover,
Right.
Which we've done worldwide. So we've started in Europe. We've taken it all over the world. We've run it in Canada in both Vancouver and Montreal. And we tested an NBA art gallery concept in Vancouver just a couple months ago. So we're trying all kinds of new things to see what works.
Perfect. So it really merges the sport, the science and art of our business, right? Mike, what can you talk about as some of those hot button topics, or where would you like to focus? Or
I really don't know.
There's so many,
for
I
the
know.
lawyers in the room, this is a good time. There are so many things changing. I said earlier that the world of licensed product hasn't changed much over the last little while, but all that's about to change. We have a digital world that is emerging. We've got tracking player data that's coming on. We've got gambling that is hitting the U.S. State by state. We've got new forms of fantasy games coming on. We've got what Cheri mentioned earlier, the Redbird deal that was announced today that looks to join the Football Players Association and the MLB Players Association. We are, quote, involved in those discussions, but we're a Canadian organization, which presents some different challenges, given our status as a trade union here in the U.S. We've got the Olympics, which, things are bubbling there as well, with athletes demanding the opportunity to engage with their sponsors more and more during the games. We've got the NCAA. States are adopting legislation now that say that the players are allowed to capitalize on their name, image, and likenesses. So there are a lot of things that are happening, and I'm happy to talk more at length, in depth about all of these, but I don't think time permits.
No.
So I will throw those out as things that we can talk about, perhaps if anybody has any specific questions later on about any of them. But for the lawyers in the room, this is a good time.
Thanks, Daryl.
I think for me, certainly one of the hot button topics, I'm going to say e-commerce and be like, well, people have been around e-commerce for a long time. E-commerce has been around, but when you think about its involvement from a sports licensing standpoint, sports business was behind the times as it relates to, products and e-commerce and how fans receive product. And I think what you're seeing, what you have seen over the last couple of years is the emergence of companies like Fanatics, who not only from a pure retailer standpoint, but from a data capture standpoint, are really forging to the forefront in terms of really building new, innovative partnerships with each league and association, for that matter. And I think as you will continue to see that evolve, we're just scratching the surface right now with what's available. I think from a data side, from learning more about your consumer, and I think you'll see leagues and players associations really start to tap into more data involved with the consumer who's out there purchasing it. And I always said, some of your best data is sales data in terms of who are your top teams or who are your top players. You can have polls and you can have research out there, but the cold hard facts in a lot of cases are, what team is selling the most, what player is selling the most, and that helps drive some information for you as to where you need to pivot or where you need to, maybe pay more attention to some cases. So I think e-commerce, certainly from a trend standpoint, though has been here. I think there's still a long way to go for that business, and there's a lot of opportunity out there for fans and for leagues and partners to really tap into a little bit more.
Okay. I think we can, we'll drill down on a couple of these because I think they're of interest to the students, and then we can kind of look at some of the other questions. But for the Canadian market in particular, perhaps for those in the room, it's always important to contextualize it. And I know sport is global, but is there any particular insights from the three of you in terms of, for the students in the room, to think about how the Canadian market operates in that global landscape, or how can they think about how we're positioned from a licensing merchandising perspective?
The industry's small, especially in Canada. You think about, you've got major leagues represented, but the actual industry from a licensing perspective is actually quite small in Canada. So I think it's critical for people in the room who are interested in that, in this field, is to build strong relationships. And I think any good partnership, and you heard a lot of panelists earlier on, especially in the corporate partnership world, talk about, building partnerships that are beneficial for both parties, and it's not transactional. It's about doing what's right for both parties, and I think that philosophy extends to licensing. I always tell my licensees that if you're successful, we're successful. So why wouldn't I do my best to make sure that you're successful? So that's sort of a mantra that I try and carry on, especially in an industry that's really tight.
So small. Perfect.
I think we've seen a lot of retailer consolidation in Canada, and that is something that is not unique to Canada, but that is particularly acutely felt, I would say, by both licensees and licensors, in that the distribution mechanics, the traditional distribution spaces that you have for licensed products are much narrower than they were certainly when I started in the industry. And so I think that basically affords us an opportunity to be more creative. The way that you currently look, if you went to our Fanatics sites, for example, or you went to a traditional bricks and mortar retailer, you're still not getting a full assortment of fan either apparel, accessories, whatever you're looking for. And so I think there is a big opportunity for niche licensing if you can do it in a way that everyone's making money, to your point. And then, yeah, there are some opportunities there, but it's about almost like micro-targeting with the niche on the one end, and then going really big on your master licenses, where you're going to make the bulk of your revenue and you're also going to get the bulk of your exposure. And so I think we're underserving this other end over here, and a part of it's because of staffing, and part of it's just because we haven't been creative enough.
Okay, good.
Interesting
add, Mike?
challenge. Well, I'll just say the obvious. The market is small, but it's hockey's biggest market. So when you're a sport trying to expand and grow, we're playing at 97% capacity, 99% capacity in some Canadian buildings, and over 100% capacity in other buildings in Canada. It's tough to bring in more bums in the seats. I mean, what do you do to grow the NHL? So this is why there have been initiatives over the last little while to grow internationally. We've got a set market overseas. We've got a European fan base that's passionate about hockey. They're knowledgeable. We've got a large number of players coming from Europe. So we're looking aggressively at trying to grow our game in Europe and in Asia.
Perfect. And then on that question, or in this section of the presentation, I think one of the areas, and Mike, I'm going to start with you again, and then please feel free, either of you, to chime in. I do think that, and I see this as a teacher, the students are interested in the conversation around the athletes' rights. And so I wouldn't mind just talking about that for a couple of minutes, because I think in many segments of the industry, whether it be athlete entrepreneurship or the athlete's voice from media's perspective, in terms of even the uninterrupted brand, to Rule 40, and to what you talked about in the NCAA, that conversation is a real shift in the industry, and it's something I think I hear every day from students. It's something of interest. So whether you want to give an opinion piece or kind of speak to it from your lens, I do think it's something that they have an interest in, and it actually allows us to understand the topic better.
Right.
So I feel it might be interesting to just expand on your thinking and
Sure. So
perspectives there.
name, image, and likenesses, right? It's personality rights, publicity rights. It goes by a number of different names. It's really the exclusive right as an individual to control the commercial use of your name and image. It started historically as a right to protect against invasion of privacy, and it's evolved into a commercial right. It's still a provincial or state-run right, so it's not uniform across Canada. It's not uniform across the U.S. There are some countries in Europe that don't even recognize it. So there are problems across. When you're dealing with a patchwork quilt of legislation, we're dealing with rights of publicity legislation that pop up from time to time across various states, and we're chasing down, and we're lobbying to try to get the best possible legislation in place. So when you look at the college, I mean, it's the college issue has been brewing for a number of years now, with pressure from the individuals who play the sport, the sports in the U.S. colleges that generate tens of millions of dollars from ticket sales, merchandising, to the famous Nike and Under Armour deals that happen with the teams. There have been pressures to allow the individuals to profit from their names, image, and likenesses, just like everybody else would. And of course, there's the other side of the coin. The NCAA has got issues with that. They're trying to thread a needle here to try to figure out the best possible way to do it, because you could imagine a situation where Big Bob's auto dealer down the street from Alabama's got a bucket load of money. He's very interested in a kid from Kentucky. How do you prevent that guy from encouraging or bringing the kid in from Kentucky and saying, hey, you know what, you're going to be Big Bad Bob's auto dealer spokesman, and here you go, here's a bucket of money to play for the Alabama Crimson Tide. There are a lot of issues, and you can see both sides of it. You can certainly see the individual side saying, this team's making a lot of money, and I'm the one that's bringing in the people into the stadium to see the team play, and you can see how it can quickly get out of control.
Point out one thing. Nobody's making a lot of money. It all goes right back to the school. The only argument they have is the coaches get paid too much. Every dime funds Title IX programs. Every dime goes right back into the general fund or the athletic fund. So these assholes don't have an automatic right to take some of that money from me.
So then there's the happy commentators like my friend Brian, who's got a very opinionated view on the other side of the equation. So I'm just up here explaining both sides of the equation. You could take Brian's for what it's.
But you're right, it's a recruiting problem. One, they can bribe kids to go there. Two, the schools that have visible players like that are going to out-recruit the schools that don't.
Right.
They're going to say, you come to Auburn, and all of our starters have side deals.
Yeah.
So that's problem number two. Then you're going to get into inevitably going to be a gambling issue with some of this.
Well, you know, you talk about the schools and defending them as not making the money and putting the money back in, but there are a lot of commercial partners of the schools that are making a lot of money based on, you know, the sales of video games and T-shirts and all that stuff. It's not just the revenue that's going back to the schools; it's the commercial partners that are as well making money on the sales. So, anyways,
It's an interesting big topic.
I was going to say, can I ask you a question? Because I feel like the one question and comment in all of this, and I don't really have an opinion on one side or the other, it's just the value of the education that they're actually getting, right? These kids are going on scholarship. How do you feel about that as a professor?
I went to Florida State when they won their first and second national championship and a Heisman Trophy, but I'm 29 years old, don't look anything up. It was a very different time and place, and in the South it's very different how they recruit, and these kids many came without having computers. I think my point was, it's a very complicated topic, but anybody going into the business of sport in any facet, I do think has to be aware of how pervasive it is, and it's not something we talk about in programs too pervasively. I mean, most sport management programs were pretty traditional, how we deliver. And I didn't know if it had come up yet at all, but this is what kids are talking about, quite frankly, and young adults in classes, and I think it's so important for you, because it's also an ethical issue. It's a huge basket of stuff that's not talked about, but you're gonna be faced with it. And I've had students that now are at the COC, and they're grappling with the Rule 40 that's gonna come up. And so, and I also believe the athletes have some rights, so.
And Leah, you've got the issue too of pay for play now, because kids come without a computer. They're talking about a stipend on top of their full ride. Well, right away you're gonna get into a three-tier system. There's gonna be 50 schools that can pay that stipend, and all the rest can't. So now you already have the haves and have-nots. It's gonna get worse. And yet these kids, some of them don't have winter coats. Some of them don't have laptops. So, and you cannot work. If you're on a full ride, you cannot have any income during the calendar school year. So it's very complex.
and it's going to get even more complex, as you alluded to with gambling. You know, that's a state-by-state thing now in the U.S. And you know, we're lobbying in virtually every state that has legislation on the books to make sure that the athletes are being protected. A lot of states will be allowing gambling on college sports. Some have acknowledged that, no, that's too close to home. They don't want to go there, but there are other states that say, no, we're going to allow people to bet on, you know, the Final Four and the March Madness.
These people in the room are too young, but some of us aren't. In our
29, Brian.
In our lifetime, there has been a college betting scandal at Boston College, a very significant one, where players were throwing games because they were in debt to bookies. We had an NBA referee in the last 20 years get into hock with gambling and try to throw games. Like, these are not remote things that might happen. They have happened.
Right. And it's state by state, so it's again a patchwork.
It is, but then, you know, we see the scouts come up here. I mean, it is, there are things our students need to be aware of, right? We have NCAA scouts here all the time.
Absolutely.
So, and who said merchandising and licensing was boring, right? There you go.
We got
So I'm glad we
Brian
brought that up. Next time we'll add Brian on the panel. We're going to go into questions, but because of the past year, Leah, I just wanted to talk about what the value of winning from the Raptors' perspective means to the NBA from a licensing merchandising, because those case studies are really always great. And then we'll open it up if that's okay. Thanks.
Sure. So obviously, it was the first time the Toronto Raptors had ever won an NBA championship. It was thrilling for those of us that work for the NBA in Canada. And what it meant for our business, just to give you kind of a top line, we did as many sales in 1 month as we did in the entire year. So we doubled our business in 1 month, and then some. And that tale, I think, we'll continue to see this year. We're in a unique scenario. I think the only other, comparable might be the Toronto Blue Jays in terms of if they were to win a World Series today, they would see similar results, and that there's only one team in Canada, and so become sort of, shorthand for Canada's team, which is fantastic. We definitely are collectively enjoying the benefits of all of that, and it's been really fun to be on the other side. Yeah, because when I started, the Raptors didn't do that well, so it's very exciting to be there today.
And does the actual percentage, because students have asked me this, the percentage still is slightly higher if it's a national championship logo, or is that still a model that's used? No. You can't talk about that.
It depends. It
confidential.
depends. But I think, to Leah's point, I think, that's where, good strategic partnerships with the right companies to take advantage of what we call the industry hot market is extremely critical, and it is advanced so far since the last number of years. Within minutes of not even minutes, seconds of a championship, those championship hats are on sale, those championship t-shirts are on sale, and they're delivering in 24, 48 hours. And I think it's important for leagues and associations to be able to capitalize on those hot markets, and that's where having great partners and partners that are able to deliver and execute, really help, obviously, help you take advantage of those hot market opportunities.
Yeah, I'd say hot market used to be, can you take the order and deliver it within 72 hours, and now it's, can you do that in 24 or sooner?
Yeah.
And so that is, the expectation from the consumer is a lot different than it used to be.
I have a question. Myth or reality? What happens to the losers merch?
So it depends. There are years where we actually destroy the merch. So obviously the locker room winner tees are created for both potential teams in such a scenario where they might both win. And other times they're donated. So it depends on sort of the philosophy of the team.
They've also been used as furniture stuffing in the past as well. So
This is an organic panel, so I think
true?
it's time now to open it up for questions. We're learning all the time in this topic, as you can tell. So is there a couple of minutes of questions, and then Carolyn will let us know. Yeah, Trevor's giving us the cue, so quick. Yep.
Hi there, Andrew Federico, Quantum Sports Management. My question is related to players in regards to branding them. Now, if we are going to allow gambling and athletes to receive compensation outside of their scholarships or anything given to them by the school, is this going to affect their amateur status, or are they now going to be considered professional athletes?
That's a good one. The NCAA has the definition of what amateur is, right? I mean,
They would be allowed to continue to compete.
under the new legislation, they would, yes. So California, I think Florida, but California's law is only coming into force in 2023. So really it was a push for the NCAA to do something about it, because they were, everyone felt that they were just dragging their heels. There is a commission in place now. They're supposed to be reporting, I think, in the fall. We're past the fall. By the end of the year, on the recommendations on how to do this. But yes, it would be a redefinition of the amateur status, which would allow them to continue to compete and make money off of their names and images.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, which looks well timed.
I'll be really quick.
Go
Greg
ahead.
Maychek with Hamilton 100. We're bidding on the Commonwealth Games. But my question is this. Over the last 5 years in the NBA, is there an item that you created that you thought, this is a surefire hit, it's going to sell, and it didn't? And opposite to that, is there something that you produced that you thought, no way, the public won't buy this, and it was hugely successful?
So our licensing team has a joke that if we hate it, it will sell. And sometimes that's true. I think sometimes just an indication of how old we're all getting. But there have been a couple items that we thought for sure were going to sell really well and didn't. Usually that's a function of distribution, not so much the actual quality of the item. Things that have sold well that we can't foresee are things like pop sockets, things that are cheap and cheerful, but everybody wants and they're hot for a minute. Those spinner things that were hot for 10 minutes. Those were big. You make container loads of them, and then all of a sudden nobody wants them anymore. So if you can get the product to market when people want it, it's fantastic, and you'll make a lot of money in that little window. And I think all of us have had success with some of those products over time. But yeah, those are always the ones that I'm like, who's going to buy this thing? And then
I always make a rule that I don't make the decision whether or not I like it, whether or not we sell it or not. You poll some people, and I'm never going to be the guy who says I don't think that's going to sell. You need to poll a few other people with differing opinions to ensure that you don't have a blinded opinion. I think to Leah's point, stuff like ugly sweaters and stuff like that. Well, that was a phenomenon that continues to keep going for some reason, and we still sell a lot of them. And I think that's another perfect example of some of those products that it's not up to me to decide whether it's going to sell. And to Leah's point, it's the distribution and it's the marketing behind it.
That's when
we
you
sell-
need your big influencers on Instagram
Yeah.
to
That's
help
right.
you out.
Yeah, your 200 followers. We sell $300 short shorts with what is called a crotch print, literally across the front. I didn't think those would sell. They sell quite well.
Well, on that note,
We said
This has
licensing
been-
wasn't interesting, right?
thank you for the opportunity, Brian and Trevor. Thank you, Carolyn, for introducing us, and I hope you all enjoyed our panel. Thank you all.
Thank you.